Welcome back to LA Book Club. I'm David Acuff, your host, and I am an author myself, 7-time author, and I am here to read some other indie novelists to expose you to strange new worlds and stranger new authors. Speaking of strange new authors, today we're going to be talking about Steve Truitt. His latest, he's just put out book 2 in this series. This is book 1. That's where we're going to start because that's where you need to start. But he's just published the second book. So if you're in the series, bam, sci-fi series, there's 2 books in it. You need to check that out. And I know I don't have my glasses on today, but we're just gonna go for it. Psych! Just kidding. I need my glasses. All right, so this is the Mindset Chronicles. Book 1, The Deletion. This is from our good buddy Steve Truitt. Look at that guy. Look how handsome he is. Yeah, that's sexy right there. The Mindset Chronicles. Book 1. In a world where artificial intelligence has become an integral part of daily life, the sudden death of AI, of all AI, sends society into a tailspin, a disconnected, surreal, post-AI period known as the Deletion. As the world struggles to come to terms with the loss, bad boy genius Peter Eriksson has invented a new form of interconnection called Mindset to reconnect the world in this strange new time. Conceived from a century-old concept, crowd wisdom, this revolutionary device links the minds of all those who possess the necessary implants, becoming the only hope for humanity to rebuild and recover from the loss of AI. But Bethany Okoye, Peter's part-time lover, part-time rival, remains leery of Peter's devices and isn't shy about making her opinion known. It is only when humanity encounters a global challenge unlike any other that the two must find a way to work together to address a threat that could endanger the very nature of reality itself. With action, suspense, and thought-provoking themes, this science fiction novel explores the dangers of our reliance on technology and the possible consequences of a world without it, while also delving into the potential benefits and dangers of a mind-connected society. Elon Musk, neural net, connect us all. I don't know what you guys, I am getting the neural net. I want to be able to change my TV channels with my mind powers. I want to become the Jedi that I was meant to be. Okay, chapter 1. Now, as I recall, this jumps around a bit. We get snapshots from all over. Picture this like an Independence Day. You remember on Independence Day, you got Malcolm over here with the genius, and you got this girl over here that's doing her thing. And you got these guys, and you got the test pilot with Will Smith, and he's doing his thing. So lots of different stories all make up the entire thing. Think of that like this one. All right, so part 1, the first duty. He said duty. I'm going to read this little snippet here. It says, Year 0. The war lasted 87 seconds. In that short time, the world came to a complete standstill. No buildings were bombed, no soldiers killed on the battlefield, no planes shot down, and no prisoners of war captured. No coffins of slain soldiers flown home, no funerals, no memorials, just silence, disconnection, isolation, and peace. This event would become known as the Deletion. The Deletion. Oh, snap. Chapter 1. This is the NORAD communications room in Pikes Peak, Colorado. 0 minus 1 minute. It's 4:59 p.m., February 21st. 60 seconds to complete systems failure, the emotionless computer voice announced. No, damn it, pleaded Elias Overstreet, who just checked in for his 12-hour shift on the night post. Knowing instinctively this wasn't a drill, the private first class from Salt Lake City experienced a simultaneous paralysis and heightened state of alarm, a deer in very high-tech headlights. But true to the training that had been meticulously woven into his subconscious, he quickly jumped from his seat to the dusty, usually ignored glass case marked "Emergency" mounted on the wall next to the picture of the president. "Break, break, break," he urgently whispered as he worked up the nerve to punch through the pane, ignoring the small, rusty hammer dangling from a chain right next to the case. With one jab, the glass split into shards easily, and with his other hand he grabbed the 2 keys hanging before him. He had only moments left. 30 seconds to complete systems failure. "I know," he belted as he stretched his arms wide, holding a key in each hand. He was vaguely aware of the emergency phone ringing in the background, a kind of subliminal ticking clock coinciding with the announcements from the computer on the intercom. But he didn't care who was on the other line. If he couldn't get the 2 keys into their respective slots and turn them simultaneously before the end of the countdown, it wouldn't matter if it was E.T. who was calling. Come on, he urged himself as his left hand fumbled to position the key. Ignoring his right hand, Overstreet simply felt for the slot on the right, confident he could insert the jagged piece of metal without visual help, as his left was his weaker side. He was wrong. The key on the right caught the edge of the console and slipped from his sweat-soaked fingers. 15 seconds to complete systems failure. Overstreet instinctively rammed the left side key into the slot, only devoting a millisecond of brain time to wonder why he hadn't thought of that in the first place, and knelt down below the console to receive the other key. The ringing phone was now a present and permeating alarm, further agitating his already heightened senses. Should I answer it? No, he thought. Right now, the key was everything. 10 seconds to complete systems failure. Now on his knees, scanning the black linoleum floor, which was unbelievably the same color as the key, Overstreet tried to wipe the sweat from his eyes with his hand, but only felt more moisture, the warm pull of something sticky. He looked down to see his right hand was covered in blood from the punch to the glass case, and, to make matters worse, he had just smeared a dose of that blood into his eyes. "Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior," he sputtered in a frantic whisper. "Give me the strength to—" Suddenly, his probing hand landed on the key. Yes! 5 seconds to complete systems failure. Spinning the key in his quivering fingers, he repositioned his crouch to rise quickly, attempting a reversal of the impending shutdown, but forgot that he was under the console. His head slammed against the bottom of the edge, knocking him back to the ground like a rag doll casually loosed from a child's hand. As the last vestiges of his consciousness eroded, he heard the computer's fading countdown. 3, 2, 1. Complete systems failure. Pew! Private First Class Elias Overstreet's vision turned gray, then darker gray. The last thing his collapsing consciousness registered was the phone falling silent, the whirring of the computer fans and the generators slowing to a stop, and everything going black. Overstreet. They should have known better than to put like the Marx Brothers in the main room where it's all going down all at the same time. He's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Now we are at Toei Subway train car 771 northbound in Tokyo. 0 hour, 9 a.m. Commuters jammed the late winter's frigid metal rolling box, their eyes dutifully affixed on their mobile devices as their heads rocked and bobbed in unison to the weathered suspension of the wheels gripping the rails that stretched across the terrain ahead of them. All at once, every device lost connection. Pew! The feed on the flat screens at each end of the train cars went black. As the train rattled along, the passengers silently looked up, beginning a fruitless search into the eyes of the others on board for some kind of answer. Nobody had one. None of them were getting any information on any device. One bewildered passenger looked up to the speaker system where announcements were made, but until that moment ignored. Not even static. Temporary outages on the TV screens were normal, but for all the passengers to lose their cellular signals all at once was at the very least peculiar. It was as if the world outside the train had suddenly stopped trying to reach them. Now we're in Paris at the Crédit Agricole Bank. Bonjour. 0 hour, 1 p.m., 9 a.m. Tokyo, 1 p.m. in Paris. Okay, I got it. 2 overnight security guards had just registered their arrivals for duty. Pierre Elordoy turned to François Allemagne. Avez-vous une cigarette? He asked while simultaneously pressing 2 fingers up to his lips to simulate taking a drag. François rolled his eyes. Vous n'avez jamais la vôtre. Reluctantly, and with a huff, François reached into his breast pocket, emblazoned with his bank's logo, and pulled out a wrinkly, almost finished pack of Galuzi menthols, and placed one in the skinny yellow fingers of his partner. Ready with a match, Pierre lit his cigarette first and then saved the flame for François, who was no longer looking at Pierre, but instead through the window of the bank across the street. Pierre followed François' gaze. On the other side of the Rue de Bretagne, bathed in the light of a collection of red emergency street lamps, a small crowd was gathering outside the coffee shop at the corner. Each member of the stunned crowd had their phones in their hands, but no one was looking at them for data or entertainment. They all appeared to be searching within their phones to find something. C'est bizarre, François mumbled, allowing his lit cigarette to fall free from its dangle on his lower lip. The moment was broken by Pierre, who called François' attention to shift to their login station. C'est mort, he nervously announced, while attempting to hit the button harder this time, but it was clear. The unit was blank. And now we are in New York, South Street, Seaport, 0 hour, 7 p.m. On Wall Street, brokers had just finished trading for the day. As per usual, they were spending their evening congregating in the open area of John Street, just across from the trading post, tossing back brown liquor and sharing stories of the day's trades, when, for no particular reason, the music at the pier stopped. At the same time, several partygoers were checking their phones to see if their Uber was on the way, when the arrival time disappeared from their screens, and then their phones shut down. There was an eerie calm in the air, an almost deafening silence for a few beats as the street inhabitants looked to each other in a daze. There was an unspoken chill that ran through their spines, as if some secret seance summoned the ghosts of September 11th, 2001. Not since then had the south end of Manhattan been so motionless, so silent, so caught off guard, and without a clear reason why. "What happened to my signal?" one woman queried, cutting into the thick fog of confusion that spread through the crowd. "I don't know," her slack-jawed neighbor muttered before tapping his phone again, hoping to revive it. But it was no use. The city, it seemed, had gone electronically silent. No one was able to communicate with the outside world. This is now at the White House. We take you to the White House, 0 plus 2 minutes, 7:02 p.m. The Oval Office had just been painted, and the newly elected president, Taluta Lightfoot Penny, wasn't happy about spending her first few days in the land's highest office out of her office. Although the West Wing of the White House offered many competent rooms in which to work, the president wanted to work in the most famous one, and despite Mrs. Penny feeling the walls needed a fresh coat, She convinced herself that as president, she made the final decision and entered the room to a blast of paint fumes and drop cloths neatly folded and laid out along the walls. She crossed to her desk and, making do with her half-finished glass of Chablis and a bite of salmon she brought with her from the kitchen, she opened the late edition of the New York Times, which to her was unfairly spinning its view on what she was already doing wrong. She knew she had some time before the IT gang swarmed the space, setting up the various computers and wireless interfaces she would need to do her job, so she quickly turned to the crossword, which she thought to herself was unusually easy for a Friday. Before she could fill in the 5-letter word for "not a winner usually," her chief of staff, Emerson Jackson, her former campaign strategist, burst into the room trailed by 3 Secret Service agents, the Secretary of Defense, and a military policeman, all with stone expressions indicating there was an emergency. Penny was startled. Despite knowing the job required a constant state of alert and protection for the chief executive, but she wasn't expecting a dramatic show so quickly. "Madam President, we have a situation. Come with us, now." Now we take you to NORAD. 0 + 6 minutes. It's 5:06 p.m. But NORAD, we're back to Elias. The pounding in Elias Overstreet's head was matched by the increasingly loud pounding on the access door to the communications room. It took him a few seconds to collect his thoughts, as his senses danced in and out of clarity. The warning, the keys, my head. Ignoring the incessant banging on the door and the muted screams just outside it from security trying to get in, Elias sat up and pulled his sticky right hand from the pool of blood that had collected on the floor where it rested. That's when he felt the sudden thud of pain that seemed to be triggered by the realization he was injured. The deep, sharp ache seemed to throb throughout his skull as if it had its own heartbeat. I'm coming," he attempted, but his voice was soft and weak. He drew his bloody hand over his head to push his hair back, and was met with another fresh pool of blood oozing out of the 1-inch crack on his crown, where he struck the console. His vision remained blurred despite his attempt to widen his eyes to see his hand better. No use. He felt as though his brain had been knocked loose. I'm hurt," he mustered, now realizing he could not stand on his own. He knew he'd lost a lot of blood. The pounding on the door stopped, but not in his head. They heard him. I'm hurt. I need help." "Stand clear," an assertive voice from the other side of the door announced. Before Elias could put the signals together to even move to safety, a blast from the other side launched the door into the room, slamming it to the floor just a few feet from where Elias was sitting. The concussive wave permeated Elias's head like a bullet, redoubling the impact of his injury. As he began to lose consciousness again, the last thing he saw were the boots of his rescuer coming to a rest beside him. He felt a warm hand on his shoulder and thought he heard a voice say, "Stay with me," before he fell back into unconsciousness. Meanwhile, back at the White House, 0 + 7 minutes. It's 7:07 p.m. at the White House. President Penny instinctively leapt to her feet and rounded the front of the desk where 2 agents grabbed an arm each, whisking her across the floor to the southwest secret escape hatch hidden in the wall, still glistening with a fresh coat of pale blue satin finish. Toluta Lightfoot Penny of the new Libertarian Party, the first successful third political wing to emerge after the collapse of the two-party system, held members of each previous devotion, Republican and Democrat. The party was given last rites several times by more than several of the highest online news sources, but managed to coalesce enough groundswell to find a candidate in Penny who could show the country there was a future beyond the rabble that clawed for power in the past. Elected by the narrowest margin in the country's history, the newly sworn commander-in-chief had not even been properly briefed by the Secret Service during her transition on the protocol for emergencies. She was not to question or resist any efforts by the security detail to get her to safety. She knew it was their one and only job to protect her, and despite the gratitude she felt for the way they had so professionally and swiftly swept her away from her wine and newspaper, she still had one question she felt like she needed to ask. "What's going on?" "There's been some kind of attack on our grid, ma'am," Jackson announced in a staccato, hurried way as he shuffled along the corridor leading to the back staircase. "The entire grid is down. Power is out. No one has access to any communications." "The grid?" Penny asked. "But the lights are still on." "The White House runs on its own power, ma'am. Has for a decade." Jackson put his hand on the president's back to quicken her pace. Normally she would consider this a violation on several levels, but in this case she barely noticed. The secret stairway descended below the dining room. An abrupt right turn led them down more stairs under the Roosevelt room to an 8-foot-high iron door, which stayed open for the president to easily access the room beyond. Penny followed her Secret Service agents past the threshold, followed by the military guard, who turned and pulled the massive steel door closed. An eye scan and code punched into the keypad and the door was secured. No one went in or out without the president's permission. The narrow, brightly lit hallway, which smelled to Penny like metal shavings and gunpowder, quickly gave way to the next entrance, a double set of thin glass doors through which Penny could see the emergency bunker. She had been given the tour of the facility while she was a candidate, and had been given access to security briefings and a small protection detail. She distinctly remembered the smell of the hallway, but most of the rest was a blur as she was consumed with campaigning, debates, interviews, and making sure her family wasn't too caught up in the negativity that came with it all. Penny was surprised that the first Secret Service man, whose name she'd not yet taken the time to memorize, was able to simply push the doors open. The 7 hurried figures stepped the 2 steps down onto the main floor, where Penny could take in the room again for the first time. She remembered being overwhelmed by the dark, stealthy feel of the place, like something from a spy movie, and this time was no different. Although only 1,000 square feet in floor space, the bunker was impressively ample. The first thing Penny remembered from her last encounter was the noise. Comm traffic, warning squelches which seemed to resound in sequence, and the 36 voices of personnel merged in an overwhelming cacophony of dutiful busyness. Bright lights shined down on soldiers huddled over their computer screens. Bodies moved in and out of her peripheral vision, and on the walls hung gigantic high-definition monitors displaying maps of the world. One screen displayed what she quickly recognized as a war scenario simulated by computers at the station below. Another showed regions of the United States with large sections portioned off by grid lines and highlighted borders. For what, Penny was unclear. Another new set of officials stepped up to her. One of them saluted and engaged her directly. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Anthony McLemore from SATCOM." McLemore stood stiff as a newly printed 3D soldier action figure, with his elbow cocked at a perfect 90 degrees, hand flat, fingers brushing the edge of his eyebrow, in what Penny was getting used to seeing as the perfect salute. She casually saluted the captain back to a more human mode. "What's going on? Is my family safe?" "Yes, ma'am. Your husband and daughter are in the family bunker next to this one. You'll be able to communicate with them at any time." "Well, I'd like to..." Ignoring the president, McLemore turned to the glass-topped desk beside him and tapped the top of it. It sprang to life with a map of the entire world. Each major city on the map had a glowing red dot over it. Some dots were larger than others, but the map was virtually covered. "Each dot represents a city, ma'am," McLemore began. "I can see that, Captain," Penny interrupted, eager to find out what was going on, but just as eager to get back to the topic of her family. "What do they mean? Is this some kind of attack?" "Ma'am, these dots represent a loss in comm traffic, cellular signal, sat uplinks, and landlines." Penny strained to understand how this was possible. Who did it? The Chinese? North Koreans? Macklemore pointed to the screen, swinging his finger back and forth over the map. Doesn't seem likely, ma'am. All major communications have been scrubbed worldwide. No longer stunned by the urgency of her escape and finally mentally arriving at the moment before her, Penny lifted her head back up and looked at the captain. He seemed young to her, new, maybe a little scared. Penny was sure that she had seen this soldier before, maybe at her inauguration, maybe as part of her initial security detail when she was a candidate. Macklemore wasn't anyone you would necessarily remember. He was short, maybe 5'9". His dark, flawless complexion was framed by his extremely tight crew cut and jutting ears, which stood out just a little too far from the side of his head. But Penny never forgot a face. It was a trait that helped her so many times. As a politician, it got her past the awkward first conversations she was forced to have. But the preoccupation with maintaining her spotless facial recognition record would have to wait. Then why aren't we affected? How are we getting all this intel? We're not, ma'am, the captain retorted as he spun around to face the large screens which covered the far wall. All of this information is what we call suggested echo, a guesstimate based on the last data that we received. Suggested echo? Ma'am, as far as we are aware, we have had a worldwide critical systems failure of all communications, internet, data, and even our own intelligence. We are fully in the blind, and we believe so are all other industrialized nations. In short, ma'am, the world has lost all communications. Penny took this in as her stomach turned. This scenario was not even close to something she'd have envisioned. She looked down at her perfectly polished shoes and for a moment felt her first twinge of regret for ever seeking the office. It was a fleeting moment, but one that lasted long enough to truly scare her. Within the 2.5 seconds it took her to draw and exhale her next terrified breath, she had come to grips with the fact that she was in charge. No one made a move without her say-so. This was what she sought, and that meant the bad as well as the good, as well as the catastrophic. With her breath completely spent, she drew a new one and lifted her head to meet the captain's eyes once again. We're going to need to find a way to communicate. Any chance we've got a telegraph machine around here? There we go. So you see, it's all popping off in the first chapter. Communication down. We need the telegraph. That is chapter 1 of the Mindset Chronicles by Steve Truitt. So that's amazing. He is really good, very detailed, a lot going on there. So, if you like something like The Martian, a very detailed, if you're into that real science of how things work and that kind of thing, this is that kind of story. Not like my stuff. Not like my space opera. This gets in the nitty-gritty of the real science. That is today's reading. Hope you enjoyed it. Go check it out. Available on Amazon. Next time, we will get into this one. Focus. We'll get into this one. Noah's Rejects by Rob Kagan. Great. Thanks, guys.